Now let's make problem a bit more interesting and more complicated. Of course, you can add more constraints, more realistic constraints, but now let me show the other side of the complexity that our problem may have. It's uncertainty. Okay, what kind of uncertainty in our model we have? We can have different kind of uncertainties, but the most important one, or the common one, could be the price forecast. We assume that we exactly know our future market price forecast, but it's an assumption, so let's now try to relax it. So how? For example, assume that again, back to our previous illustrative example, in hours 1 and hour 2, assume that still our forecast is perfect and deterministic, and still they are $50 per megawatt hour and 60. But let's consider that our forecast for the hours, which is more far from now, means hours 3 and 4, they are uncertain. They could be, for example, in hour 3, instead of having 65, it could be either 65 or $77 per megawatt hour. So we don't know which one exactly will be realized, but assume that will be one of them. And the same story for the hour 4, that the market price might be 70 or 80. Good. So the question is that now how to model this price uncertainty and how to plug it to our optimization problem. Good. You may have heard of stochastic programming. In the literature, we have different techniques to model, to characterize uncertainty. And one of the techniques which applied extensively in literature is stochastic programming. There are the other techniques like robust optimization, like chance constraints, whatever. All of them, they are out of the scope of this lecture. So we stick to stochastic programming, scenario-based or sample-based stochastic programming. What does it mean? It means that in this technique, we need a finite set of plausible scenarios. And for each scenario, we need to assign a probability. So of course, the summation of the probabilities for all scenarios should be equal to 1. In our case, remember, we had 4 hours. For the first 2 hours, only we have one potential price assigned or corresponding for that hour. But for the last 2 hours, we have 2 potential prices. So how many scenarios do we have in general? It's 1 times 1 times 2 times 2. We have 4 scenarios for future prices, or 4 scenarios for the profile of the future prices in the coming 4 hours. What are those 4 prices? So for example, what are those scenarios? Based on the scenario 1, the price in hour 1 is 55, in hour 2 is 60, in hour 3 is 65, in hour 4 is 70. So here we have all the combination of the prices that we can build based on our forecasts. And in this case are 4 scenarios. Good. So here let me assume that the probability of each of those 4 scenarios, each of them is 0.25. It means that all the scenarios, they have the same probability. Good. Again, how to generate the scenarios, how to assign these probabilities are outside the scope of this lecture, but they are very interesting topics. Well, again now we would like to plug these scenarios to our optimization problem. But one thing which is very important, one important point, is that now instead of maximizing utility, we need to maximize the expected utility of the large consumer. What does it mean? So in the form of the optimization, again, we maximize. Okay, let me first introduce the new symbols. So now we need to have a new index in additional to the previous indexes, which is S index for scenarios. In this case, 4 scenarios. So phi S, again, it's in black, means that it's parameter. It's a scenario-dependent parameter, and it shows the probability of scenario S. Also now, we need to update the symbol of price because it takes another symbol, which is S. Now our forecast price as parameter is lambda with the indices of T and S, means that the market price at time T under scenario S. Also, we need to update our variable, which is still in red. It takes a new index, which is the scenario. So we have a P, lowercase p, with the indexes of T, K, and S. Shows that the procured energy at time T for block K under scenario S. So back to optimization problem, we are maximizing the expected profit, which is, okay, have the similar structure as before, but also we need summation over scenario, and also the utility term, also it includes the probability term, the probability parameter. And we have the similar constraints as before, and for simplicity here, I dropped the ramping constraints, but still we have the limits for procured power, and also we have the minimum total energy requirement of the large consumer. And of course, it's scenario dependent. It means that at any scenario happens, my total energy procured in all 4 hours should be at least 970 megawatt. Good. So now let's, for the last step of the complication in this lecture, let me add the last complication to our optimization problem. But this way, we gives more freedom, more degree of freedom to large consumer to buy its required power from the different resources. So far, we assume that the only source that the large consumer can buy its power that it requires is the hourly markets. For example, hourly day-ahead market. But the other source is bilateral contracts. Of course, you can consider other sources like, I don't know, future markets or intraday market, real-time market, whatever. But here, just we like to stick to hourly day-ahead market and bilateral contracts. Okay, it's already complicated enough. So what does a bilateral contract mean? Perhaps most of you knows. Bilateral contract is a contract outside the market between the large consumer and a power plant. It's a direct agreement between them. So they sign some contract. So then for the all future hours, they agree on the same quantity, for example, and at a fixed price. And this price is a price that both of them, the power producer and the large consumer, they get agreed upon. So it's not something based on the market clearing algorithm. It's something, a price and a quantity that they agreed on. So we have a large consumer, we have a power producer, so there is cash flow from large consumer to power producer, and the power producer provides or supplies large consumer at a fixed quantity, at a fixed time period, at a fixed price. Okay? So, let's see how it complicates the problem. Let's assume in our illustrative example that the consumer, the large consumer, has 3 options or 3 contract options that the power producer provides for the large consumer. So power producer says to large consumer that I have 3 types of contracts, and it's to large consumer to choose at most one of them. Okay? In this case, we assume that the large consumer can select at most one of them, but it's just an assumption. Maybe in other illustrative example, you relax it and the large consumer can buy more than one contract. Okay? So based on the contract 1, denoted as C1, it spans in the all 4 hours, and then the quantity that they can agreed on should be something between 200 and 300. For example, it could be 250. But please note that if the large consumer buys this contract, then the quantity should be fixed. For example, 250 between these 2 upper and lower bounds. And then this quantity is time invariant. It means that in all 4 hours, right, it's fixed. It's 250. It cannot be 250 in first hour, 230 in the second hour. It's fixed. And then at any hour, the fixed price is 67, irrespective of what market price is in the market. The price of this contract is $67 per megawatt hour. Also, we have the other type of contracts here, and the main difference is the spanning time period. For example, contract 2 only spans over hours 2, 3, and 4. It means that whatever you agreed based on this contract will be delivered only in these 3 hours. And the same, it's a shorter contract, only spanning hours 3 and 4 based on contract 3. Okay? Good. Now we would like to see how we can add the possibility of buying energy based on bilateral contracts in our optimization problem. Please note that the large consumer needs to make decision whether to buy or not buy from the bilateral contracts much before than declaring the hourly markets. So this time axis shows that, for example, the red is the time, the point of the time that the large consumer should make a decision on bilateral contracts. It's before than hours 1 to hours 4 of the market problem, right? So it means that as a large consumer, I have no idea which price uncertainty, which price scenario will be realized in future. While I have this uncertainty in advance, I have to make a decision, which is a fixed decision, scenario independent decision, right, before the realization of the uncertainties later. Clear? Okay, maybe next slide can make it more clearer. It means that now we have a 2-stage decision-making problem, and we call this as scenario 3. And we have 2 stages, the first stage and the second stage. The first stage is the time that we should make a decision for contracts, to bilateral contracts, to buy or not, while the second one is our decisions from the market. And since we had 4 scenarios, so here we have 4 branches. Okay? So we need to solve this problem in the first stage to find the optimal decision in the first stage while accounting for the uncertainties that haven't realized yet. But considering all these scenarios, we need to make our optimal decision here. So this problem is referred to as 2-stage decision-making problem. Okay? So first stage and second stage. Good. So 2-stage stochastic programming model. So this is my last slide. So the key point is that, remember, whatever I make decision here, it's scenario independent. It means that I cannot say, if scenario 1 happens, I buy contract 1. If scenario 2 happens, I buy contract 2. No. While you don't know which uncertainty happens, you have to make your decision on contracts. Okay? So this is why I call it scenario independent. And the variable that you need to modulate in the optimization should not have index of the scenario. While your decisions in the second stage to buy power, procure power from the markets, of course, they are scenario dependent, right? Because your strategy under different scenarios to buy power in the market might be different. It depends to the scenario and the price in that scenario. Okay, so this last slide says that the first stage decisions are scenario independent, and usually in the literature we call it here and now decisions. While the second stage decisions are scenario dependent decisions, and usually we call it wait and see decisions. So if you are interested in this problem, I think it's a nice idea that you treat it as an exercise and try to formulate it yourself and try to solve it. And if you like to check your results or you need more information, of course, you're more than welcome to contact me and ask more questions and suggestions about that. Thank you so much.